The Exorcist gave birth to the possession horror film and is one of the most profound horror films that's ever been made. So let's dig into the reasons why and also analyze the meticulously brilliant direction of director William Friedkin. In this video, I want to break down some of the major reasons why The Exorcist is so profound and why it's considered one of the all-time great horror films throughout film history. So I'm incredibly excited to get into today's video where we dissect all things Exorcist, William Friedkin's masterful direction, and at times unethical direction, and why I think it's one of the all-time great films that's ever been made and is such a product of its time when it was made in the 70s. So let's get into it. If you're new here, I'm Jordan and welcome back to my channel. I'm a narrative writer, director, and producer, and have been working in LA for the last 10 years. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and what filmmaking can teach us about life. This is the second video in our Exorcist breakdown series. In this video, we'll break down the compelling character work and performance of Detective Kinderman by Lee J. Cobb, the great use of dialogue and performance to reveal exposition, the major themes in the film, and why it's so profound when both Father Merrin and Karras sacrifice themselves to save Regan, but also to be reunited with God in the afterlife. Often considered one of the scariest films of all time, especially when it came out in the 70s, The Exorcist really gave birth to the possession or exorcism horror film that is still really popular in today's horror landscape. I really do believe The Exorcist will go down in history as one of the most terrifying and influential horror films of all time. So with that set up, let's dive in. Okay, this might be my favorite scene in the film. This is where we first meet Detective Kinderman, and this is such an amazing scene. This sequence is basically a walk and talk where we get information from characters as they're moving from space to space. But what's so brilliant about the staging of this walk and talk is that it's divided into a couple parts. It's divided into, I think, about 3 parts. And so the first part of it is we see Detective Kinderman watching Karras running across the track. He's sitting in the stands just very casually, and this performance by Lee J. Cobb, who plays Detective Kinderman, is just absolutely astounding. If you were to ask me who's my favorite character in the film, I would absolutely say it's Detective Kinderman, and partly because of the acting performance by Lee J. Cobb, just absolutely astoundingly good, so charming, but also very intentional.
Oh, we haven't met, but they said I could tell.
And every single moment about getting the information he needs to solve this investigation. I love that he has the skill of lowering the defenses of each character he's talking to. He really appeals to them by deploying flattery.
Exactly, John Garfield. People tell you that, Father?
To bring them in. He uses a little bit of humor. He's very personable. And then he starts to seed the information that he's actually seeking.
This director was doing the film here.
But he never outright just asks what it is. He lowers the defenses. He knows he has to be a little more skillful because people get really cagey, especially if there's sensitive info that they don't really want to talk about.
Father, what do you know on the subject of witchcraft?
So I love that he has such a fantastically elegant approach to this and has this incredible understanding of human psychology and how to really bring people in before he asks and strikes for the question that he actually wants to know.
Desecration in the church. You think this has anything to do with witchcraft?
By that point in time, the characters are pretty much willing to answer the question because he's brought them in and really connected with them and felt like a very personable, realistic character. So I really like this element that he brings to this film. And I think the reason I love this is so often when we see detectives in movies, especially noirs, they are always stoic and they don't say a lot. They're not very personable people. If you think about connecting with other people and being lively or having a sense of humor, they're not really joyful people. And so I love that this detective is much more personable and skilled at the art of connecting with people, being interpersonal, bringing them in before he strikes with the info that he actually is out there for. So what's really amazing about the sequence is there's a few different places they walk before we cut, and now we're in a different area, and you realize it's all around Georgetown. I think the understanding of geography here is one of the great parts about this sequence. Is we go from the track to walking near the tennis courts, and now we're walking near the front of Georgetown, the building, and that's where Karras actually stays, is in one of the dorms. So I really like that we're connecting the pieces that end up getting Karras back to where he actually lives. He's already on the way back home anyway from his run. The detective is just willing to walk with him, and it shows, again, his approach to, I'll walk with you, I'll stick with you until you kind of give me the info I need. And he's just slowly prying, but doing it artfully, and he's appealing to Father Karras's humor side. He's even complimenting him and saying he looks like specific actors like John Garfield or Sal Mineo.
You look like Sal Mineo.
And he also says he looks like a boxer. So he's deploying all of these different elements to engage him and show him that he is a guy that's trustworthy. He does have a sense of humor. You can trust to tell him that this information will be safe. See, he's a good guy. He cares about you. He'll connect with you. So I think these are all incredible decisions from Lee J. Cobb and Friedkin. And I just love how we're getting so much information in this scene about who Kinderman is, the fact that he knows more info about the director's death and that the head was twisted around on the steps. And what it really just shows us is that this is the first we're introducing of the death on the Georgetown steps, where ultimately Father Karras will also meet his demise at those same steps, much in the exact same way that the director Burke died at Regan's hands earlier in the film. So I think it's pivotal that these two are having this dialogue right now, because ultimately it will be Father Karras who dies. And again, Kinderman will be there to see it in the same way that he saw the other one. And one of the other things I really love is toward the end of the film, when Kinderman comes in and Father Karras has just launched himself out of the steps. He's at the bottom. He's inches from death. We see the look on Kinderman's face when he looks and realizes the whole cycle repeated itself and he was right. Everything he was suspecting was confirmed. And there's almost a look of sadness there where he almost looks like there's something he wished he could have done to save Father Karras or changed any of this from happening. But he knows ultimately he couldn't. One other thing that's absolutely incredible about this scene, and I'm not sure how they pulled it off, is the fact that they're walking behind a tennis court for a large section of this walk and talk. The whole time we're hearing the tennis balls getting hit back and forth. People are actively playing tennis.
We've got a witchcraft kind of murder, and on the other hand, a black...
What this does for us is it grounds us in a sense of normalcy. It doesn't feel too staged. It feels like this is a very real thing where people are playing tennis, they're just going about their day. But also, somehow, the sound of the tennis ball and the talking behind us is designed in such a great way by the sound design team that it doesn't distract us in a way that you would think it would from such a heavy dialogue scene.
Clear around, facing backwards.
So I'm absolutely astounded. I watched the scene back a few times and I never once found myself distracted by the tennis balls being hit. So I just want to say how amazing it is that it almost adds to the scene. It gives us enough visual interest to peek at, but it also doesn't distract us from the two characters having this dialogue at hand. Very rarely have I seen a scene where there's so much else going on. There's other sonic stimuli and other stuff happening in the background, and it not draw our eye away from where we should be looking. The next dialogue scene that we have with Kinderman, with Chris here, where they first meet, is such a great scene. It's so simple. They're mostly at the table, and what I love is there's this coverage where we start wide, and then once we start working into our close-ups of each character, we start zooming slowly into each character as we're cutting, and as we cut back and forth, we're progressively closer and closer to their face. And then once we've sort of reached this emotional climax, we start to diffuse the tension by slowly zooming back out until we're back at a wide shot and we're back at a place where we're sort of recentered in the space, if you will. So what that almost symbolizes to me is in the rhythm of an interesting conversation in real life and in drama. We have moments where it feels like the stakes are escalating.
The deceased was killed and then pushed from your daughter's window.
But we also like to ease back out before we leave the conversation.
It's very remote. No, never mind.
Oftentimes in real life, because it's better to end on a note that's less heavy than leaving on a note of tension where something's unresolved. I think that always bothers us a little bit as humans. So this psychology approach to the scene is just so well done. And again, Kinderman here does such a great job of really appealing to Chris's interests. He really brings himself in. He really adds to the flattery before he asks her all the serious questions. And perhaps my favorite part about the end of the scene is that at the end of it, he actually reveals that he is a fan of her because she's an actress. That's pretty well known. What I love is he asks if Chris can give his daughter an autograph, since he says his daughter's a fan because Chris is a pretty well-known actress in the film.
For my daughter, could you please give an autograph?
And then when she asks,
What's your name?
he admits he's actually the fan. It's actually for him.
I lied. It's for me.
So I really think this is such a nice character moment that shows he's personable, but the flattery in a lot of ways is probably real. But in certain ways, it might just be for the sake of doing his job. But you don't really fully know either if that's also just a tactic to appeal to her and show that he can really be a fan. He can also be vulnerable in a way and say, hey, I am a fan of yours. I'm admitting that. What's also pivotal about this scene is that this is also when we reveal the importance of the geography of the location of the house, but also the location of Regan's bedroom window in proximity to those Georgetown steps where Burke died and where Father Karras will eventually die. We see that the house is basically right up against the back of those steps, so that it is possible when you fly out of that window, if you go far enough, you reach the steps and then can ultimately descend all the way down to the bottom. So I think this is an important thing to symbolize the logic of the film, that this is how the first guy died, Burke. He was thrown out of the window. That's the only possible location he could have been thrown out of. So we establish it came from Regan's room, meaning Regan, as possessed Pazuzu, threw Burke out. And again, this is not only foreshadowing, but it also helps us symbolize that this is beyond something that can be explained with science. In the very last sequence of the film, where Father Merrin and Father Karras are trying to help and save Regan with this exorcism, there are some absolutely incredible filmmaking techniques and practical effects that are happening right here. I think just the use of lighting and the light gag with the light going off and on, giving us this strobe-like effect, is amazing, but it also gives us a chance to reveal different pieces of visual information in between each flash. And I also love that we see Pazuzu flash on Regan's face during one of those strobes. And I really have to point out that, again, the makeup here, the attention to practical detail, when the house and the ceiling actually start cracking and the walls start cracking and the camera starts shaking, it almost feels like a Star Trek effect. It feels so intense, but still so real. It really feels like everything that's happening in this room would happen in the real world. There's not this crazy mist happening or anything. It's just real practical things happening that probably would happen. That's how a house would crack. And I love this effect where she levitates up toward the ceiling. I looked at the scene many times since I've done some levitation effects in my own work, and it's amazing that you do not see the wires anywhere. You don't see any potential harness, or you don't see her gown getting pulled by any way. A lot of times it's a dead giveaway that there's a harness or something when you look at the clothing, but she has a full gown that is not getting touched by anything. So really is a testament to the special and visual effects work here that looks so incredibly realistic. I'm not 100% sure where they put the wires. I'm assuming they had wires somewhere, but that's something I just want to point out is excellent filmmaking. As a filmmaker, if I can't figure out how they did it, then the magic trick is still fully preserved. And then of course, I think there is something to be said for the profundity of Father Merrin's death. So it almost feels like ever since we met him in Iraq at the beginning of the film and he sees the Pazuzu statue, there's this look of horror on his face where he almost has a premonition too that the end is somewhat near for him as well. It just feels like he knows and has already accepted his death is coming, especially when he comes back around and he ends up showing up in this iconic shot for when he goes to actually help Regan. This iconic image that you see in the poster here shows up outside the front of the house, and there's this intense godly spotlight. I really love it because it almost symbolizes to me, it's almost as if the light is coming from Regan's room. It's almost as if God's light is shining onto Father Merrin to say, here I am, come up to me. And in a way, this almost foreshadows Father Merrin's death eventually to come, because this is where he dies. So I almost liken it to, this is God calling Father Merrin to his ultimate resting place. And the light is sort of that symbolic, intense, focused light that we usually see from heavenly things, or what we associate, I think, with heaven's light. Apparently it took him a whole day or two just to set the shot up. And then on the second night of shooting it is when they actually got this specific image the way that you see it now. It's funny because it's such a quick image in the film, but it really is one of these incredible, iconic images that really signifies so much more about what happens in the film on a thematic level. One of the big inspirations from this is William Friedkin noted that when he read the novel of The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, who also worked on the film, there was a description of Father Merrin when he arrives at that point in the novel, and he describes Father Merrin as a midnight traveler frozen in time. And this image is basically the recreation of what that means based off that description. So I love that he took that description in the book, which is a very literary description, and found a way to actually translate it on screen in the film in such an iconic way. So I love that. We see when he's looking at Regan, sometimes he excuses himself to go to the bathroom and his hands are shaking and he takes a pill to try to calm himself down. I think you see that the fear of God truly is in him, and you almost start to get the sense that he's aware his end is also near and he's almost accepted it. He's ready to go be with God. He's spent his life serving God. Now is his time to go and be with God. One other line that I really love that happens, this exchange between Chris and Karras as Karras is sitting in the living room and Merrin is up there with Regan by himself, is he's sitting there. It almost looks like he's praying. He looks dejected. He's still grappling with this crisis of faith. And I think you see that in his expression. And Chris asks,
"Is she gonna die?"
And his response is amazing because he goes,
"No."
He's very sure. In that moment, that's really the moment, I think, where he's decided what he's going to do. He already is ready, I think, to reclaim his faith, to do whatever he needs to do to get that demon out. And I think because he's so sure of that, that's why he's able to answer, yes, she will not die. So when he goes up to the steps, again, symbolic, he's ascending the steps upward this time to heaven, going to be closer with his God up there. That's the way that I interpret that, is he goes in. Merrin is now dead. He's laying on the ground. The holy waters dispersed. I love that you don't really ever know how that played out. You don't really see the details of how he died. He is already dead. And Regan's just sitting in the corner of the bed, almost shocked. The demon's almost shocked at what they've done. And that's an amazing expression because most of the film, as Regan's possessed, it's just a look of hatred and anger. And in this moment, it's almost just like perplexity. And then, like I alluded to before, this scene makes me emotional every time I watch it. When I see the absolute sacrifice that Karras has finally decided to do for Regan's sake, even at the expense of his own life, it's hard not to feel choked up and get emotional thinking about he did finally reclaim his faith. He's making the ultimate Christ-like sacrifice to save Regan. He's already fulfilled his purpose as he sees it. His mom's passed away, Merrin's passed away. In a way, I think he sees it now as his chance to go join them in heaven, to be with them. And he has served his life's purpose. This is what he needs to do now, save Regan. She has a full life ahead of her. And what's interesting is I came across this term in my research called a demonicide, which in a way implies that he is accepting the demon into himself with the intent to kill himself, i.e. kill the demon, in a way that resembles a suicide, but killing the demon at the same time. So he ends up deciding, I'm going to commit this demonicide in an effort to save Regan and to extract her, and also save Chris too. So I love this moment where he says, come into me, come into me.
Come into me! God damn you! Take me!
And I love that there's a moment where we see his POV as the demon of he could still get Regan. He could kill Regan now that he's possessed, but his faith is so strong that instead of going for Regan when he could have, he has enough humanity to launch himself out of the window to kill the demon once and for all, which is really the only other way to have killed that demon since Merrin is now dead. So I love that he realizes this is my ultimate purpose. This is my sacrifice here that I'm doing for Regan. And Kinderman shows up and you almost wonder if he had showed up just a little bit earlier, could he have maybe saved Karras? Probably not. But I love that we show up and he goes in, he sees Merrin is dead, but Regan's okay. And the first thing he looks down at is the steps and he sees Karras down there ostensibly on his deathbed. And his expression says it all for the way that he probably wishes things could have gone and the fact that he really couldn't have changed anything. It was destined by fate for it to go that way. And one last thing to note too that I only caught upon this subsequent subsequent viewing is at the end of the film when the other priest goes down to give the last rites to Father Karras. His hand actually opens twice, which signals to me he has an ounce of life left in him before he's gone. Maybe he even has more life left in him. I'm not sure. To be honest, I actually have not seen any of the sequels, so I don't really know what goes on to happen, but I am very curious if that means he did actually for sure die, or there still is enough life left in him, which would mean the demon still has a little bit of life left in him too, and is still alive. But I love that the priest is crying over him. He is clearly close with this other priest who is the same one who comforted him when Father Karras' mother died and they were drinking whiskey together. I see this as one significant way he can still comfort Karras even in his last moments. Absolutely beautiful. So the main themes of good versus evil, faith or a crisis of faith, the female body, possession, science, and the leap of faith. I think The Exorcist does such a great job of toying with all these different themes, and I think it does such a great job of wrapping up all these themes in a film that's not only terrifying and heartbreaking, but also at its core, absolutely profound. That concludes why The Exorcist is one of the most profound horror films of all time. I want to hear from you. Comment below your favorite memories of the first time that you watched The Exorcist, or what your favorite scene in the film is. Let me know if there's any other films that you want me to cover in a future video, and I will definitely make sure we get them covered. And for more movie breakdowns, you can definitely check out more of my videos like this series that I did on A Nightmare on Elm Street, which you can find here, so definitely give it a watch. And stay tuned for next week, where we'll continue to break down different scenes from great horror films from a writing and directing standpoint, so I will definitely see you then.